No one really prepares you for this particular moment. No one sits you down beforehand and explains the strange, unexpected calm that shows up on the day you finally decide to stop. The day you set down everything you have been carrying for years, every ounce of forgiveness you kept handing over, every bit of patience you kept extending, every drop of love you poured into a person who never once stopped to check whether your own cup still had anything left in it, and then you simply walk away. There is no dramatic scene, no long speech, no final attempt to make them finally understand your pain. It is quiet, and it is just you stepping out the door. The moment that happens, something significant starts unfolding on the other side of that quiet, something most people never get to actually witness. It is something the person who treated you this way will never admit to you or to anyone else. Psychology can describe it in dry clinical language, but almost nobody paints an honest picture of what it actually feels like in real life, how it moves through someone and slowly takes them apart from the inside. Once you truly understand it, this piece of knowledge can hand you the peace you have been searching for. In short, when a deeply feeling person finally walks away for good, the narcissist's quiet unraveling begins. We are going into that inner experience today, not to celebrate anyone's suffering and not to dress up revenge as insight. We are doing this because you deserve to understand what your presence actually meant to them, what your absence now sets off inside them, and why leaving someone who treated you like an emotional fuel source rather than a full human being is not only the right decision, it is the strongest one you will ever make for yourself. Let's start where this story always starts, with you. You are not weak. Get that settled right away. Highly sensitive, deeply feeling people are not weak, are not naive, and are absolutely not broken. In truth, they are some of the most emotionally attuned people you will ever meet. You feel things at a deep level. You read people almost like a second language. You can walk into a room and immediately sense what is unspoken, what is unsettled, and what someone is hiding behind a polite expression. That sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a kind of intelligence many people spend their whole lives chasing and never quite reach. But here is the part nobody warns you about when you carry that gift. It also draws attention you never asked for. That does not mean you were foolish or careless. It means someone whose entire psychological survival depends on drawing emotional energy from other people can sense your emotional capacity from a distance. They gravitate toward your warmth, the way a dying flame leans toward fresh air. They want what you naturally have because they cannot generate it from within. So whether they consciously realize it or not, they attach themselves to you and begin quietly drawing from your energy. Stay with this, because it is not just a poetic idea, it is genuine psychology. What they feed on has an actual name in the research, and that name is emotional supply. Before you can fully grasp what happens once that supply is removed, you need to understand what it really is and why it matters so much to them. Most people assume a narcissist simply wants attention, that it is a straightforward ego thing, someone who enjoys hearing how impressive they are. Praise plays a part, but emotional supply reaches far deeper than that. Think about what it feels like to have a stable sense of self. It means waking up already knowing who you are. It means absorbing criticism without falling apart. It means sitting alone with your own thoughts without spiraling into anxiety or sudden anger. Most people carry at least some version of this ability. It is not flawless, and it is not always easy, but there is a solid base underneath, a core identity that can weather emotional discomfort and survive on its own. A narcissist does not have that internal foundation. Behind the confidence, behind the charm, behind the carefully constructed image of someone who has it all together, there is a frightening emptiness, a fragile and unstable core that only feels real, important, and safe when someone out in the world is continuously confirming it. That confirmation was the role you were playing the entire time. Every time you listened, every time you forgave, every time you tried to understand, every time you gave the benefit of the doubt, absorbed their toxic moods, and reflected back a polished, flattering image of who they wanted to be. You were doing far more than simply being a good partner. You were functioning as their psychological scaffolding, the temporary structure wrapped around an unstable building that would have collapsed long ago without you holding it up. You did all of this because of who you are underneath everything. When you love someone, you love without conditions. You saw something real in them, something they carefully revealed to you in the early days, and you believed in the better version of them you imagined they could become. You poured yourself into that belief. You made yourself smaller to leave room for them. You silenced your own completely valid needs so you could tend to theirs. And somewhere along the way, you mistook their bottomless emotional hunger for love, when in reality it was simply hunger. This is the exact part that breaks someone open once they finally see it clearly. It is not just realizing you were being used, as painful as that realization is on its own. It is realizing how long you allowed it to continue. It is sitting with how many times you went back, how many obvious red flags you quietly recolored as harmless, with nothing but stubborn hope holding the paint in place. It is recognizing how much of yourself you handed to someone who was never capable of receiving it the way you needed to be received. Now, here is the quiet truth waiting on the other side of that ache. The moment you truly see it, not just intellectually understand it, but feel it settle into your bones, something inside you shifts. The grip loosens, the fog clears, and you begin to understand that walking away was never quitting, was never failure, and was never cruelty. Walking away from an emotionally extractive relationship is the first genuinely self-aware decision you make for yourself in a very long time. It is clarity wrapped in courage. It is the exact moment you stop performing love for an audience of one who was never really watching you at all, only watching what you could provide. And when that moment finally arrives, when you quietly, fully, and permanently leave, that is precisely when their inner world starts to fall apart. Let me show you what they will never let you witness on the surface. They will not call you crying at 2 a.m. to admit they are falling apart without you. They will not sit across from a therapist and confess that losing you exposed a wound they have spent decades avoiding. They will not post something genuinely vulnerable online about how hollow they feel now that you are gone. They will not show up at your door to say the exact words you always hoped to hear, that you were right, they were wrong, they finally see the damage they caused, and they are truly sorry. None of that is coming. If you have been quietly waiting for that moment, holding a small corner of yourself open for that validation, hear this clearly. The absence of that moment is not proof that they are completely fine. It is proof of something far more revealing. It means whatever is happening inside them is so overwhelming, so threatening to the false identity they built, that showing it to you or to anyone else is simply not something they can do. Not right now, and possibly not ever. What happens inside a narcissist when someone finally leaves for good is not ordinary grief, the way you understand grief. It is not the gentle ache of missing someone you love deeply. What actually happens, and what the research identifies as their core experience, is full destabilization. It is the sudden shattering of a constructed self. It is the abrupt removal of the external support system that had been holding their entire sense of reality upright. Picture it this way. Imagine wearing a prosthetic limb your entire adult life, not because you lost a real one, but because you never actually developed one underneath in the first place. You learn to move through the world with it. From the outside, no one notices anything missing. But the instant that support is taken away, you cannot stand on your own. You cannot take a single step forward. The absence exposes exactly what the presence had always been covering. That is what you were to them. Not simply a partner, not simply someone they chose to build a life with out of genuine mutual desire. You were the prosthetic, and now you are gone completely. The first thing that hits them is panic, though it is rarely the panic you would ever actually see displayed. It is not necessarily even panic. they consciously register in themselves. But underneath whatever performance they are putting on for the world in the hours and days after you leave, there is an intense internal alarm firing at a level that is genuinely difficult to put into words. Their nervous system, which had quietly calibrated itself around the steady stream of validation you provided, suddenly has nothing left to measure itself against. The input it was built to depend on has been cut off entirely. What follows is internal chaos that shows up as agitation, restlessness, and a total inability to concentrate. There is a low-grade, persistent dread they cannot name and therefore cannot resolve. Researchers sometimes describe this as a narcissistic injury, and it is far from minor. When the primary source of narcissistic supply is abruptly removed, the psychological response can resemble withdrawal from a physical substance. Cortisol spikes, sleep gets disrupted, appetite shifts in unpredictable ways. Concentration falls apart entirely because the narcissist has never built the internal architecture required to manage discomfort in a healthy way. Their entire strategy has always been to borrow emotional regulation from someone else, rather than build it internally, so they are left with no real tools for what they are currently experiencing. They are flooded, and a flooded narcissist becomes unpredictable, unstable, and at least for a while, deeply revealing. Stay with this next part because it matters. This is the phase where the behavior that confuses people the most tends to appear, the kind that makes you question your own memory and second guess everything that happened between you. Suddenly, there is a wave of affection. Unexpected messages arrive at all hours. Elaborate apologies start sounding more sincere than anything said while you were actually together. There are grand gestures, sudden promises of total change. They bring up warm, shared memories with a softness that tugs at something deep in your chest, making you think maybe this time really is different. You might catch yourself wondering if your leaving was the very thing that finally broke through their defenses, if losing you was what made them finally see what they had done. This pattern has a name. It is called hoovering. And understanding it on a functional level rather than an emotional one is one of the most protective things you can do during this particularly vulnerable window. Hoovering is not love. It is not even really about you as a specific individual. It is purely a supply-seeking behavior. It is the narcissist's psychological system recognizing that its main source of emotional regulation has been removed and sending out every available signal to recover it as quickly as possible. The warmth they display is genuine, only in the sense that the desperation underneath it is genuine, but that intense need is not for you as a person. It is for what you represented, the steady stability your attention provided, and the mirror you held up that reflected back the idealized version of themselves they could only see through your eyes. They are not reaching out because they miss you specifically. They are reaching out because they miss the version of themselves that only existed when you were there propping it up. If you go back and the hoovering succeeds, nothing fundamental changes. The painful pattern resumes almost immediately. The temporary warmth fades quickly, and the old dynamic reasserts itself in full. The root issue was never really about the relationship itself. It was never about poor communication, bad timing, or difficult circumstances. The root issue was always a fundamental inability to meet you as an equal, to regulate their own emotions without draining yours, and to love you without constantly taking from you. No amount of pain caused by your absence can fix that on its own. Pain alone does not create real change. Pain combined with genuine accountability and a sustained willingness to do difficult internal work is what creates real change. And that specific combination is extraordinarily rare within this particular personality structure. So when hoovering fails, or when you decline to respond, or even if you briefly go back and then leave again with far greater resolve, the internal panic deepens. What follows next is a stage people rarely discuss, likely because it is the least visible from the outside. The obvious rage has settled, the relentless hoovering has stopped or been refused outright. What remains, finally impossible to drown out with noise, is the very thing the narcissist has been avoiding long before they ever met you. They are left with silence. Their own unbearable silence, their own difficult company, their own raw reflection with no external mirror left to soften it. That moment, more than anything else, is where their real psychological difficulty truly begins. There is a very particular kind of silence that follows the true end of a relationship with a narcissist. You have likely felt this yourself. It is that strange, disorienting stillness that slowly settles in once all the chaos finally stops, after the intense arguments, the exhausting emotional cycles, the whiplash, and the constant low hum of anxiety that came from never knowing which version of them you would be dealing with on any given day. When that noise disappears, the silence that follows can feel almost unbearable at first. Not because you actually missed the chaos, but because that chaos had become the dominant rhythm of your daily life. A rhythm, even a painful one, eventually becomes familiar, and familiarity, even toxic familiarity, offers a strange kind of comfort. Here is what matters most to understand about this. The silence you are sitting in right now is the same silence they are sitting in too. But for them, it is not simply uncomfortable. It is catastrophic. You were never just their romantic partner. You were their constant noise. You were the steady stream of external input that kept their chaotic inner world from becoming too quiet, too still, and far too honest. Every conversation, every emotional reaction, every moment of focused attention you gave them, whether positive or negative, functioned as essential input. It was sound. It was signal. It was ongoing proof to their fragile nervous system that they existed, that they mattered, and that the story they told themselves about who they were held together. You were the dedicated audience their performance depended on. Now the theater sits empty, and in that empty, quiet darkness, a performer has nothing left to do but stand alone on the stage and finally look at what is actually there underneath the mask. What a narcissist finds in that silence is rarely what they expected. They fully expect to be fine because they always expect to be fine. The dominant story they carry about themselves, the very story that required your constant participation to hold together, insists they are naturally resilient, exceptional, and exactly the kind of person who never needs anyone else. Sitting in real silence without anyone left to perform for and without anyone left to confirm the story is the first place that belief starts to crack. It is not loud and it is not visible from the outside, but underneath everything, it is the beginning of the reckoning they spent their entire life avoiding. The reckoning that your steady, quiet decision to finally walk away is what made unavoidable. If you recognize yourself anywhere in this, know that leaving was never a small thing and it was never selfish. It was the clearest act of self-respect available to you. You do not need their apology to heal, and you do not need their unraveling to validate what you already know to be true. Your peace does not depend on their reckoning. It depends entirely on you continuing to walk forward quietly, steadily, and completely on your own terms.